Welcome to part two of the Animal Combo Book Project. So in here, we're pretty much going to cover the clone stamp tool. You can see here I've done some cloning and painting to merge the leopard and the elephant together. I don't know quite what other parts I'm going to include yet, so I haven't added those yet. But I am going to show you how I did this today with the clone stamp tool. And then before that, let's check out the original photos here. Here they are in their own folder. And I recommend doing this, like making a copy of your photos and having the originals set up with the mask just so that you can always come back to them later on. One thing I've done is I made the selections a little bit different. If you notice here, if I remove the mask by holding down the shift key here, you can see that it has a harsh edge along the edge here. So I'm going to hold shift and click here again. And to get rid of that harsh edge, what I did is I used the lasso tool here and basically just drew out a selection kind of like this. And then I did that on this side and on the bottom, and then just made sure I was inside the mask. And then if you have white as your foreground color, which it is right now, if you hit the backspace key, what will happen is that area will kind of go away and it'll essentially mask. So I'm going to undo that because I have enough of that removed. I'll hit Control D to deselect. But I highly recommend keeping your originals in the folder here. So the final composite one, I'm going to look at this here. Let's take a look. So we have a layer at the top here, which is the painted layer. I could rename that just by double clicking on it and call it painted or painting. And then on this layer was the cloning. So I'll just rename that clone. And so if we zoom in here and take a look here, if I toggle off, I'm going to actually turn off the two animals just so you can see the clone and the paint areas. So if we look here at the painted areas and the clone areas, you can start to see what's going on here. Let's actually turn off the clone layers, and I want you to see the paint areas. You can see how small my brush is, and this is what I mean by painting in here with a stylus of some sort. Even if you do it with a mouse, if you make your brush just really small, when you zoom out, you can hardly notice it as it all comes together once we add these layers back on here. And once you scale this down even further, you'll have even more clarity in there in terms of that sharpness. Now it's not perfect, there's definitely some issues here, I haven't finished it, but I just wanted to show you a little bit of a start here with the painting and the cloning. Again, primarily we're going to do with cloning today, so I'll go over that process here for these two parts. But if I remove painting here, you can see areas that are cloned. Let's turn off the two layers here of the animal. You can kind of see what has happened. In fact, there's some errors here. I accidentally cloned part of the eye twice here. I don't want to do that. So sometimes it's nice to look at the overall image without the actual image underneath, the clone layer on its own. So let's figure out how to do this. We're going to turn this layer off and zoom out. And so I have the originals here. Basically, I'll turn them on at their original size. Sorry, those two are the original I worked on. Hang on a sec, here we go. So these are the original size ones. And before we actually start manipulating in any way, I recommend converting them to smart objects. What this does is it creates a protective container, so if you scale up or down, you can tell I have to scale down like the leopard head to match the elephant and so forth. So you do that by just right clicking on the layer and go to convert to smart object. Once you do that, you'll see it's a protective container. You can actually double click on the icon and click OK, and you'll go back into the layer and you'll be able to edit the mask and so forth. So if I made changes here, I would close this little, you can see here this new layer 2, it's called layer2.psb. Close this, and then I would hit save. It would ask to save, but since there was no changes, it didn't ask to save there. So I'm going to do that again with this layer. I'm going to right click and convert to smart object. So now if I scale up or down, it's not going to be an issue. So I'm going to start with the elephant body and scale it down a little bit. So I'm going to hit Control T, which is the hotkey for scaling it. And it is up here in the edit menu if you don't like hotkeys. So edit free transform. There it is there. And all you can do with a new version of Photoshop is just grab a corner and scale down. The previous version you had to hold the shift key. With this new version you don't have to do that. So it scales proportionally by default, which is great. So I'll just scale it down a little bit like something like that and then click enter accept. Now the leopard head, I'm going to select that layer and hit Control T again. And I'm going to start scaling down But this time I'm going to scale it down a little bit more. And then what I'm going to do is, while I'm still scaling, I'm going to right click in here. And these are all the options for transform. And down here there's this one called flip horizontal. And that will allow me to flip it the other direction and sort of line it up the way I want it to. And so the idea here is it's going to be a little bit bigger leopard head than normal, but I don't want it to be too big. Kind of want it to go from the big behind to the top head, something like that. That looks pretty good to my eye. I'm going to go ahead and select it by clicking on enter. Now I can move the head above the elephant ear like that. That would work out fine. Now I have some more source of the animal to kind of clone from. And now we can start sort of merging these two together. So looking at this, what we're going to try and do is clone some of the texture of the elephant into the pattern here. Get rid of the ear a little bit, continue the arm up a little bit further so we get some of the geometry here, and then start to clone the fur over here. So the clone stamp tool has the hotkey of S. Here it is in the tool palette. And if you just hold the mouse on it, there's a pattern stamp tool underneath, which we're not going to go over, but the clone stamp tool is the main one. All the options for it are kind of there's a couple of them up here, but you have to open up the clone stamp option, which I have over here on the side, the clone source. If you go to window and then go down to, let's see, clone source, there it is. It'll sort of pop open, and there it is. So you can reset the settings by clicking this little icon here. That'll reset everything. And I have created a little keyboard here image. I'm going to scroll up here, turn it on to show off some of the hotkeys for cloning. The first thing, actually, let me back up one moment. Let me turn off the keyboard for a second. First thing you want to do when you do any kind of cloning is we want to create a new layer. So we have our two layers here of our animals here. So we're going to click on the new layer tab, and you could then rename it, clone layer. And the next thing you want to do when you hit the S key is, by default, this usually isn't set to all layers. Usually it's set to current layer. So you want to make sure you click this and choose all layers. Now I don't want to accidentally clone the gray background. I use the gray to essentially show the contrast of the image. So I'm going to turn that off temporarily, and the white background, I'm going to turn that off. So now we just have basically these two images to clone from. And then we have our clone layer set up here, and let me show you how this works by demonstrating just largely over here. I'm going to hold the Alt key, and you see a little target symbol, and I'm going to click on the eyeball here. And if I move over, you'll start to see a preview. If I use the bracket keys and make it bigger, you can see I'm just making a larger preview of that clone. And if I actually clicked in here and started clicking, I would essentially clone the leopard up here on the top. Now I'm going to undo that a couple of times, and I'm going to turn on that keyboard here, and I'm actually going to turn off the animals temporarily, just so or actually, let's turn on the leopard one, and we'll just use that one temporarily. So again, I'm going to hold Alt and click on the eyeball, and I'll show you what's happening here. So if I hold down these arrow keys here, which are next to the M key, with Shift and Alt, I'll start to rotate the clone source. And you'll see that in the clone source icon there, it starts to rotate. It's this value right here. Now you can simply drag, and you'll start to see a kind of a weird preview of that. So you can drag by left clicking on the mouse there. I just like to use the Shift Alt with the left left arrow, or greater than, and then less than key to kind of rotate it. So that's to rotate your source. Now you can also scale the source up or down. So you can do that by these bracket keys next to the P key. So if you hold Shift and Alt and then left bracket, you'll start to see the image get smaller and smaller. And you'll see that change right here in the values with the width and height. And then if I basically hold Shift and Alt and the right bracket key, you'll start to see it gets bigger and bigger. So I can make the original source bigger, or I could make it smaller. Now this can have advantages and disadvantages. One thing that happened when I was cloning is I didn't realize I accidentally cloned the eye. And that's probably because I was picking a smaller source for that clone. So let's see this in action, how to actually clone with these keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to turn this off and bring back my my animal underneath. There we go. And I'm on my clone layer, and again I'm going to basically hold the Alt key, and I'm going to start clicking somewhere down here in the I think actually I'm gonna continue this leg up here. So I'm gonna hold Alt and click right there. I want to make my preview smaller. I'm just using the left bracket. So again, that's just bracket keys left and right without the Shift and Alt. Changes the size of the brush. Um, and then basically, I'm just going to kind of click and kind of bring this up here like that. And what that does, it kind of removes some of that ear. Now I'm going to hold the Alt key and sample from here, and I'm going to kind of bring this line across, and I'm just kind of getting rid of that ear along there. Now what I want to do is start to blend in some of the leopard into the skin here. So I'm going to hold the Alt key, maybe sample from over here. And at this point, if I start clicking, it's giving me the same size. So I think it'd be kind of nice to have a little bit smaller sample. So again, this is where I can hold the Shift and the Alt and then left bracket, which will make the sample a bit smaller there. And then I can start clicking. And sometimes you have to actually resample. Like if I kept clicking and clicking, all of a sudden I lose the edge of the leopard. So a lot of times what I'm doing is holding the Alt key and coming back in a slightly different area and just do like 1 or 2 clicks and then come back and do another little area if it's a small area like this. Obviously, if you had the entire leopard to select from, you could do a lot of cloning very easily. And then now I can start coming down here, select this little bit of area here, and kind of clone out, get some of this fur action going on here. And then maybe over here, again, I'm just holding the Alt key to create the target, and then I click a couple of times. So that actually looks pretty decent. I kind of want the fur to blend over a little bit more, but I'll do a little bit of cloning, and then probably what I'll start to do is use the paintbrush to kind of blend that in more. But this is starting to look pretty good overall. I need to redefine this shoulder a little bit more, but overall I'm pretty satisfied the way the cloning layer has started to happen here. So in the next tutorial we'll have a little bit further along with some of the cloning with other parts, animals, and then we'll go over some painting techniques in Photoshop. Until next time, see you soon for the Animal Calm Project. Cheers, bye.